everyone. Hi, everyone on Zoom and everyone here. So this talk is part of the Social Justice Lunchtime Seminar. The Center of the Social Justice Center, it's directed by Bengi Akbulut and Pablo Gilabert. Bengi could not be here today because she's traveling, but basically the Social Justice Center's mandate is to promote social justice research and encourage social justice research. So we offer graduate bursaries and a postdoc also. So we ask our fellows to present their work in progress to get feedback on their work. So this is what we want to do with Hannah's today. So she's a multimedia visual artist and an activist. So she's a PhD student here at Concordia in art history. And her talk will be followed by a commentary by Syrus Marcus Ware. Hi. And a scholar, activist, visual artist, and educator at the School of Art of McMaster University, a founding member of Black Lives Matter Canada. Syrus Marcus Ware holds a PhD in environmental studies from York University, with a dissertation focused on disability arts, prison abolition, and portraiture. So I will welcome Hannah. Do you want to, hi Hannah.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So we have a lot of people who brave the temperature to be here.
Thank you all so much. Would it be all right if I share my screen?
That's perfect.
All right, let me just. All right. Can you all see this okay? I can't see anyone's Zoom screen anymore, but that's okay.
Looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. Oops, let's go back. Okay. I guess I'll just jump into it. Sorry, let me hide this Zoom bar for you. There we go.
A Zoom. Oh, it just reappeared.
Oh no. Okay, let's go back there. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
That's perfect.
All right. So hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation on my preliminary research on my PhD dissertation, which is tentatively titled Futurities Without the Institution, the Emergence of Black Art and Activism in Nuswakamak. My name is Yaminah Ekundayo, and I want to first thank the Social Justice Center for providing me with this generous fellowship and the space and platform to present my ongoing research. And then thank you to all the folks who showed out today. I saw a lot of friends and family and familiar faces in the crowd, so thank you all for taking the time. I apologize I couldn't be in person. Terrible weather cancels flights, but I digress. We're going to move on. So a bit about myself. As Christiane said, my name is Yaminah. I'm a doctorate of art history student at Concordia. I hold a master's of architecture and bachelor of architectural studies. I am the co-founder and chair of Black Lives Matter Sudbury, installation coordinator of Up Here Urban Arts Festival, social justice graduate fellow, as well as a Wild Seed Center for Activism and Art Black Arts Fellow. So I'm going to be talking a lot about my autoethnographic approach to my research as I am like a direct participant in a lot of the work that I am doing. Before getting too far, I would like to start with my land acknowledgements, which I'm just gonna, my acknowledgements, both land and ancestral, which I'm just gonna read out loud and give us a moment. So I would like to acknowledge that, I'm currently in Nuswakamak, but I wrote this when I was supposed to be in Jojage, later colonized as Montreal. This land on which we learn, work, and live is on a ceded Ganakahaka traditional territory. I would furthermore like to acknowledge that my research and where I am presently situated is centralized in Nuswakamak, later colonized as Sudbury, Ontario. My research area is within Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and is the home place of the Atikamekw, Anishinaabe, and the Wahnapitae First Nations. I recognize that reconciliation does not begin and end with a land acknowledgement, and in fact, as a scholar, truth and reconciliation include an active decolonization of the academia, uplifting Indigenous ways of learning and teaching, as well as unlearning settler colonial state ways of living and aiding in the ongoing battle for Indigenous rights, access to clean drinking water, land back, and the end of numerous ongoing oppressive practices being imposed on the Indigenous peoples of this land. And as well, my ancestral acknowledgement, I would like to acknowledge the legacy of slavery in our country and the enslaved African people whose labor was exploited for generations to help establish the colonial lands we now call Canada. Slavery existed in this country until 1834 and is essential to recognize how the history of this country is complicit in racist and white supremacist systems. Furthermore, I would like to acknowledge that the end of slavery was followed by a series of discriminatory and repressive practices and laws such as segregation, redlining, disproportionate acts of police and state violence, systemic oppression in all institutions, and a plethora of ongoing forms of anti-Black racism. And I encourage those of you on Zoom to share with us where you're joining from, and those in person to just contemplate whose land you are on. I would also like to do a quick trigger warning because some of the following content may be emotionally challenging and might include graphic references to anti-Black racism, police and state violence, and the Black lived experience. This presentation furthermore acknowledges the prevalence of racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress across Turtle Island, and I have included several resources there for your perusal, just because a lot of the work that I talk about in terms of art and activism is quite heavy, and I just want us to take a moment to acknowledge how that is triggering for members of the Black community. So here's a quick little agenda of the things I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about my main objectives and case studies for my research, providing a bit of context into why this research is so important and why now, documentation of some art and activist instances, talking about the framework that I will be discussing within the context of my research, and then ending with some outstanding questions. So my dissertation examines the 2020 emergence of Black Afrofuturist activist public art in Eswakama or Sudbury, Ontario, by focusing on 3 local case studies. The 3 main objectives of my research is the context, so presenting a historical context for the emergence of activist public art in Eswakama in Sudbury, which is a predominantly white community in Northern Ontario. Documentation, to provide the documentation and analysis of these 3 case studies, which I will talk about in a moment, and to provide a framework for other rural communities across the lands we now call Canada. Sudbury is often considered one of the largest communities in Northern Ontario, and so it's a great case study, and that's why I wanted to centralize my research there, especially having lived about 8 years of my life there. And specifically, I intend on developing a critical framework to track this emergence in smaller Canadian cities by focusing on the case studies of Black Lives Matter Sudbury, or BLM Sudbury, Syrus Collective, and a series of independent works. So here are the 3 case studies that I was talking about. Black Lives Matter Sudbury, which is still active, Syrus Art Collective, which was predominantly active between 2020 and 2022, but more things to come there. And then independent works, which I'm still in the process of documenting, which kind of started a little bit before Black Lives Matter Sudbury, and I hope to go beyond in the following years. So I'm going to start with the context of why Black Lives Matter Sudbury has been created and where this entire movement has kind of come from and why this is significant at all during this time. So there we go. So let's take a trip back in time to 2012. So on February 26, 2012, while returning from a convenience store while visiting his father, Trayvon Martin was noticed by a neighborhood watch volunteer. Out of respect for Trayvon Martin, I'm not going to centralize the murder. I'm just going to centralize Trayvon Martin and his story. So this volunteer contacted the police saying that he observed Trayvon Martin to be suspicious and described to be up to no good and that he did not belong in this community strictly because he was a young Black male. Police told them not to follow Martin, which they disregarded, and a confrontation ensued, which led to the volunteer firing his weapon at close range and killing Trayvon Martin. Citing the stand your ground law, the man claimed self-defense and a tumultuous trial began. On July 13th, 2013, the man was acquitted of all charges. So that same day, Alicia Garza made the following post on social media, which she titled "A Love Letter to Black Folks," which she said, "We don't deserve to be killed with impunity. We need to love ourselves and fight for a world where Black lives matter. Black people, I love you. I love us. We matter. Our lives matter." After this, hashtag Black Lives Matter began trending all over the internet, and a global movement was born. So along Patrice Cancouleurs and Opal Timeti, the global movement began, and it has been active since 2013. So as a network, BLM centers the leadership of women and queer trans peoples. And today the global network has over 40 chapters, many of which are located on the lands we now call Canada. So from there, we have the creation of Black Lives Matter Canada, which began with Black Lives Matter Toronto, and then was shortly followed by Black Lives Matter chapters in Montreal and Vancouver. Following this, with the resurgence in 2020, we had chapters popping up all over Canada, including Edmonton, Fredericton, Newfoundland, Waterloo. There's Black Lives Matter Nagojwana, also known as Peterborough, Uplift, Black Center for Social Justice and Inclusion, which is located in Barrie, and of course, Black Lives Matter Sudbury, which is at the epicenter of all the work that I'll be doing. And today, Black Lives Matter Canada exists as a national resource for Black activism in Canada by supporting independent local chapters and other Black-led community groups, including launching Wild Seed Center for Art and Activism and coordinating national campaigns such as defunding the police, Black Mutual Aid Fund, and significant other programs. So in 2020, we had of course, the COVID-19 pandemic begins to shake the Western world. And then, of course, there's the loss of lives of these incredibly televised cases. You know, you have Breonna Taylor, you have Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, George Floyd. And with their loss of lives, we had the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. So 2 days after the loss of life of George Floyd, Regis Korchinski-Paquette lost her life in Toronto, Ontario, due to police involvement and a mental health crisis. The cousin of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Takara Paquette, lived in Sudbury, and through her activism and a lot of local organizing that was happening in the community, we kind of get to Black Lives Matter Sudbury. So Black Lives Matter Sudbury was founded by a group of local Black activists during the summer and spring seasons of 2020. It was founded by a series of members and currently is led by an all-Black board, including myself, Shana Calix, Isaac Vaillancourt, and E.R. Simbegwe. I'll get more into the programming of Black Lives Matter Sudbury. I just wanted to kind of touch on that as a point within the movement. So quick about Sudbury, Ontario, for those of you who are not familiar. Sudbury is considered the city of lakes, having 330 natural lakes. It's a rich mining history, predominantly nickel, which is why people often refer to it as the Nickel City. Extensive arts culture, which has come out of predominantly the downtown, but is spreading much beyond. There's a large mural culture, lots of activities transpiring there. And it's the largest community in Northern Ontario, having a population of nearly 170,000 as per the 2021 census, of which Black people make up less than 1% of the population. And despite Black people representing such a small portion of this area's demographic, within a contemporary context, they have produced numerous impressive feats of artistic interventions throughout the community, most of which emerged within the following the founding of Black Lives Matter Sudbury in 2020. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the documentation, the analysis of some of the instances created by the 3 case studies that I mentioned. So we're going to start with Black Lives Matter Sudbury, which of course is a community-oriented, which will be focusing on their community-oriented artistic endeavors. So the first project that I would like to mention is the ground mural. So this project was done in collaboration with Fierté Sudbury Pride, Regroupement des Organismes Culturels du Sudbury, and Indigenous educators. The ground mural was spearheaded by Black Lives Matter Sudbury, but this project was designed to be an inclusive project which draw attention to the marginalized communities that live in Nisswakamok in the area. So you can see here, we had a series of colors that were representative of the Pride flag, the trans flag, the Pan-African flag, and then we had the colors representative of the Indigenous medicine wheel, and then the Indigenous educators and artists on set asked if they could do the medicine wheels on as part of the project as well. And this was kind of the first significant project of art specifically that Black Lives Matter Sudbury worked on that year. And what made this project so important was, you know, when we put it together, it was a very covert operation. We had the permissions from the city, but we didn't tell the community that we were going to do it. And we unveiled the project, and within several minutes, the white supremacists in the community were talking about painting it over. And it really spoke to this ongoing erasure in the community of trying to erase the lives of marginalized people who exist in these communities every day. And it really spoke to the further importance and need for projects of this magnitude. The next project that I would like to talk about is the untitled Drip and Soul mural. So this was done by Ottawa-based artist Kalkadan Sifa, who paints under the pseudonym Drip and Soul. And in his artist statement, he said, "It's beautiful to see young Black kids come and see me doing this work and they can relate." That represents them a little bit. Because it's such a critical time and people are thinking and talking about their these issues, it connects with people more. And this project was really significant because it was one of few murals in the community that depict Blackness, depict Black femininity. And it was a very special time to be able to have this project existing in this community in collaboration with Up Here Urban Arts Festival. Another instance that Black Lives Matter Sudbury has worked on was the 1-year anniversary Reflect and Rally event that was hosted in the summer of 2021. This event was held for members of the community to reflect on the incredible work being conducted by local Black change makers and allies in the community, all of which are volunteers, and also rally against the lack of systemic change and change at the institutional level in the community. So this was a direct action, including smoke bombs, stopping traffic in front of the Greater Sudbury Police Department. And recently, while in conversation with Sandy Hudson, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Toronto and Black Lives Matter Canada, she started to speak about activism as an artistic form. And in my research, I've been trying to lean more into this, you know, the way we engage in political performance and having our bodies on the line and the movement and how everything is actually rooted within this artistic lens as well, which has been something that I've been wanting to learn more and lean more into. So this event was an Black arts festival. Sorry, my notes are always sticking together here. Called Culture Matrix. It was an inaugural Black arts festival, unlike any other hosted in Northern Ontario. It was a one-day event split into 3 portions, which was the healing, the kinship, and celebration, and it featured Indigenous yoga and traditional medicine sessions, hip-hop healing, Black and Indigenous solidarity self-screening, a series of performances by local and nationally recognized BIPOC performers, and including Juno Award-winning artist Habaya Mighty. So I have a very brief video that I would just like to show as kind of a recap of the Culture Matrix event.
Y'all are gonna say, in this place.
All right. So the next works that I'm going to talk about are by Syrus, which is an Afro-queer arts collective. So a lot of these projects were done by individuals of the Syrus collective or done collectively within the context of the collective. So the first project that I would like to talk about is the Here to Stay Baby mural by Sonia Katorkatini. So this project was done as part of Up Here Urban Arts Festival in 2020. So that summer I was invited to be the guest curator, and from there I really wanted to curate a lot of Afrocentric installations, projects in the community, because there wasn't a lot of instances of art reflecting the Black community that lives in Sudbury. And so in their artist statement, Sonia says, the mural was painted for all the people who didn't fit into a neat little box of what is widely seen as normal and nice. We are survivors after many years of erasure. We will not accept that only one type of person should make up a community. We are beautiful because we are all different, and no matter how much violence and erasure we face here, we will pass down our stories through community and will live on. This mural also specifically honors the Black and Brown people in this community who have faced exclusion in their own communities. The LGBTQ2A community who also face this type of exclusion in the community, but we always survive and we will always be here. And so this mural was very incredibly significant because it was the first mural in Sudbury, which depicted Blackness, depicted queerness, depicted a different, group of people that exist in the community. Another project that came out of this time is Amplify. And Amplify was the first documentary by Isaac Biancourt, which is also done in collaboration with Up Here. And Amplify is a short documentary featuring 3 Black women and Sudbury residents who share their lived experiences and thoughts in relation to the current political climate, racial inequality, and social justice. And you can actually watch the trailer and Amplify online. As you can see, it's an award-winning documentary which tells these incredible, beautiful stories that have been so long pushed to the periphery and not been heard. The next project that came out of this is Ethereal. And so Ethereal was a collaborative, immersive installation centralizing the theme of Black beauty, particularly that of hair. Often considered unprofessional or undesirable, Black hair truly exudes an aspect of nature, togetherness, and a palimpsest of our ancestors before us. While Black hair has become quite a contentious matter, Ethereal was designed to show the entitlement of Black culture, beauty, and community through a series of themed photo hair series that you can see before you here. And then the next project, the last one of Slayers that I would like to touch on, is Into the Matrix, Unearthing Black Futures. So this one was done this should be Up Here 2021, this project was done. And Into the Matrix was an immersive multimedia experience that allowed for the contemplation of a tangible Afrofuturistic tomorrow. It's centralized around 3 precious ores, silver, gold, and obsidian. And these artistic endeavors merged into a world of science fiction and Black liberation. So Into the Matrix was born out of a quote by Alicia B. Wormsley, which cites there are Black people in the future. Oftentimes when we talk about science fiction, there's this lack of representation of Black and brown bodies, and Alicia B. Wormsley kind of talks about this and the importance of representing Black people in the future, and that's where this Afrofuturistic endeavor came from. And now independent projects. So these are projects that are created beyond collectives and community groups. The 2 that I'm going to be talking about are ones that I worked on before I entered into the realm of Black Lives Matter Sudbury, but I am in the process of getting further documentation of other individual Black arts projects having been created in Sudbury. So the first one here is Nuit Noire. So this was a project which ranged from more common, what we coined as microaggressions, which contribute to the racism, to more damning instances of hate speech. Nuit Noire was designed to provide other demographics with an abstracted journey of what they may hear as Black student in the discipline of architecture. So myself, Sonia, and Hamza, we were 3 of the few Black students who were doing our architectural degrees in Sudbury at the time. And this was kind of our commentary on the things we had faced in the community. And what we had done was we put white letters on top of white sheets. And it was one of those things where you could faintly see the aggressions being written on them. And it was a commentary on, if you know to look out for it, it's there. If you don't know what to look out for, you don't know what's there. And it's a commentary on, racism, and how for us it's very prevalent because we know it's there and this is our lived experience. But for other people, they don't necessarily understand the lived experiences that we exist within. And then the other project that I would like to talk about is Spaces of a Movement. This was done in 2020. And it's central around key historic Black activists pertinent to the civil rights and Black power movements. The installation was designed to draw attention to the United States contentious Black history. So Nuit Blanche had happened for a couple of years, and this was the first year that was hosted in February, which is of course Black History, Black Futures Month. And at the time I was doing my thesis, which was looking at the architectural segregation of Chicago, and a lot of this pertained to the research that I was doing, as Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the United States. So of course we have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we have Angela Davis, we have Muhammad Ali, Assata Shakur, and we have Malcolm X. So I would now like to talk about the framework that is being created for other rural communities across the lands we now call Canada. So Robin Kelly says, Artivism is about creating a new culture rooted in the struggles against patriarchal capitalism. It is where the interconnection between the rejection of the oppressor's mores meets with the quest to construct a new being and a new way of being. The most radical art is not protest art, but works that take us to another place, envision a different way of seeing, perhaps a different way of feeling. And at the time when I was creating a lot of this art, I'd never heard about artivism or this intersection of arts and activism. And now it's become this, it's become the entire cusp of the work that I do. And so I selected these three images because for me, I define artivism as, it's the intersection of art, of course, the medium and the mode of creation that we are doing, activism, the socio-economical, political, or other cause that we are fighting for, but also community, the people power and the engagement. I think it's really important to put an emphasis in this work that I'm doing as this community, incredibly community oriented, that there is no artivism, there is no arts and activism without the community, without the people that we are fighting for, with, and alongside. So the approach, my goal is to produce an intersectional, community-oriented dissertation, which frames a decolonial perspective and accessible mentality, both in terms of academic language and free from gatekeeping methodologies, which disallow for community engagement. My research is informed by the works of Frantz Fanon on critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw on intersectionality and Black feminist theory. Charmaine Nelson and Alice Jim on Black Canadian art historical narratives, Syrus Marcus Ware on disability justice and artivist practices, Kara Keeling on queer theory, and of course, Robin Maynard on harmful police and state interactions and violence towards marginalized community, among a series of other Black artists, activists, and academics within the realm of Black visual activist practice. Furthermore, I intend to employ holistic strategies to assist in a meaningful engagement of the community members and pillars of the involved social justice movements. Sometimes in academia, we can get disconnected from the connection to the community because there's a lot of, academic hoops that we have to jump through. And this is kind of my journey of figuring out how I can engage with the community, but also produce a dissertation that members of my community can read and engage with, regardless of their background, whether they have traditional institutional education or not. I want it to be an accessible, community-oriented documentation of the works that we have been collectively conducting within the community, and really presented in a holistic way, which is not reproducing these harmful systems, but rather allowing them to engage with it and hopefully create something that's healing, uplifting, and makes them honestly proud of what we have created together. My research will feature interviews with local activists and artists, and in tandem with this, within the realm of the Canadian Black Lives Matter movement, I hope to interview Dr. Syrus Marcus Ware, Sandy Hudson, Raven Orion Wings, as well as independent Black Canadian activists, public artists like Young Yemi, Michelle Pearson Clark, Janet Strauss, and Camille Turner. And these practitioners were selected for their contributions, some of them for the development of the Black Lives Matter movement within the context of this country, and others as they represent established practitioners in their field beyond the confines of the institution and any one specific social justice movement, but they're working, with a lot of different community groups and a lot of different engaging sessions. Including interviews of firsthand accounts of Black activists' public art will allow for my research to be informed by community involvement, a significant pillar in the development of Black activists on organizing throughout time and space. And in addition, these interviews will use an autoethnographic approach to center my own lived experience as a Black queer self-taught artist, co-founder and chair of Black Lives Matter Sudbury, a member of Solaris Arts Collective, a local cultural curator, and someone who spent the majority of their youth and adult years thus far in Nisswakmak or Sudbury, Canada. Through the aforementioned process, my research will posit the following questions. So how has Nisswakmak-based art and activism meaningfully altered public perception and created networks of advocacy surrounding anti-Black racism and white supremacy and intersectional awareness of marginalized communities? So this is going to be a lot of, you know, how has the education and the work and the messages that have been encoded within these artivist endeavors alter the perception, you know, how has Black Lives Matter engaged with the community and where can we go from here? And how do Black Canadian arts institutions take up addressing anti-Black racism within the realm of art history? And how does being affiliated with the movement affect the ways in which the art is received? So, you know, in 2020, it was kind of a time when Black people, Black Lives Matter was on the lips of everyone. And so a lot of what I want to talk about now is how have we shifted the paradigm and the stigma behind discussing anti-Black racism, but also how has it been co-opted in some ways by specific institutions? How has, you know, how are certain institutions letting themselves off the hook by, you know, engaging with one Black artist or not actually engaging with the movement or understanding, and what other methods and strategies can we put in place to kind of decolonize academia, the institutions, and the museums through an artivist lens. Actually, sorry, I'm going to go back for a second. In addition to these questions, as I am engaging with marginalized communities, I want to remain cognizant of not recreating the harmful systems which oppress these individuals. Through an anti-colonial methodology and a restorative approach, I intend to advocate for members of the community, as well as members of the trans, disabled, and displaced communities whom I do not pertain to, but who will be heavily implicated in my research as they are at the forefront of a lot of the movement and the work being conducted. And in conducting this necessary research, I acknowledge my privilege as a scholar, my privilege to hold in this space, and my privilege to speak on behalf of those who have been systemically erased in silence. And so that is a really quick dive into my research and where I'm at. I have not yet done my comprehensive examinations, which I'm aiming to do this upcoming fall, but this is kind of where I'm at in terms of my research proposal and the stepping stones of my dissertation thus far. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And can you stop sharing the screen? And then before moving on to the questions of people on Zoom and on site, we would like to hear a bit of the feedback and commentary of Syrus Marcus Ware. Hi, lots of applause on this end of the, Alice Jim is showing it, is showing your talk online in their classroom.
Incredible. Wonderful, wonderful work, Rana. I was so moved by the way that you were thinking through and situating the presence of Blackness in the North, how important it is to showcase and celebrate some of the organizing and activism that has happened in Sudbury, and how important it is to really document what has taken place over the last couple of years in terms of organizing. And I really appreciated you starting in 2012 and centralizing Trayvon, not anyone else, and really talking through how this movement has led to some of the incredible projects that you discussed today. I was really interested in your thinking through the idea of Blackness in speculative fiction and science fiction, and it makes me think of what Walida Imarisha wrote about in Octavia's Brood, that incredible collection of writing inspired by Octavia Butler, in which she said that in fact all activism was speculative fiction because we're daring to dream that another world is possible. And I think that that's what you were sort of exemplifying through your organizing and your art. And what you're describing as artivism, was this way of using creative practice and activism to dare to dream that another world was possible. And so this idea that's sort of rooted in speculative fiction theorizing, as articulated by Marisha, that in fact, that you get to sort of dream other worlds into being. Also, Adrienne Marie Brown talks a lot about speculative fiction as a way of practicing the future. And I think that is exactly what you are aspiring to do, is helping us to practice where we're hoping to get to, a Black affirming future where Black, trans, disabled, queer folks have everything that they need in order to thrive. Thinking a lot about anti-Black racism within the arts and what you were sort of touching on at the end, thinking of Susan Gahan's work and how it might augment what you're describing in Mounting Frustrations, the art museum in the Age of Black Power. She talks about exactly what you described, this idea that it's only during moments of civil unrest that Black artists are engaged with, and usually only in auxiliary galleries, kitchen galleries, temporary Instagram takeovers, never acquisitioning into the permanent collection or any of the other things that would actually change the material conditions. So I really appreciated you touching on that. And again, if you bring all of these things together, what is happening in Sudbury? What is happening within your artistic practice? What is happening with your artivism, that would allow us to dream into a different kind of future that would transform the conditions in the world so that we would have the justice that I think you're articulating, but also so that the art world would transform and change so that for Black artists and for Black artivists, I guess we would say, there would be different possibilities. So I'm really excited about your research, really excited about where you're headed, and I can't wait to see what comes from this dissertation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely want to lean more into speculative fiction and really give Afrofuturism more of a center to my research. I've been kind of going back and forth, but I realized that a lot of these projects, even though I didn't cite them necessarily as speculative fiction or as Afrofuturism, they really are that, because we're dreaming of this tomorrow where we're all liberated, where we're all free, where our existence is known and we can just exist, just be happy, just be ourselves, which is really important in the work that I'm doing. And I really appreciate your helpful and fruitful commentary, Syrus.
Thank you. So I will switch the view of the room so we will see everyone online. Cool. So that's good. So is there any people either online with questions or on site here? Questions or comments, of course.
Your question, please. That helps. Do I need to stand up or it's
I don't know. I think it's fine.
Hi, Rina. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me or see me. It's Kobe.
Is that Kobe?
It is Kobe. I have
Hi,
the privilege of hearing about your work over different stages, so it's a pleasure to be here. I relate a lot in terms of working with and alongside social movements and doing your dissertation work. And I guess I was really touched and motivated, among other things, about how you're thinking through the actual dissertation composition. And you use words like holistic, anti-colonial, caring for each other, and naming the interviews in autoethnography. I guess I'm really interested in that paradox. You and I have spoken about it before, but where you're at now with the paradox of caring for folks that you're working with and caring for yourself as you have in fact positioned yourself to do this work in relation to institutional dynamics as a Black scholar, as a Black artivist. I know your latest title is Without the Institution, and yet we're kind of myself included, caught up in these contradictions of terms to make interventions, I guess, but I wonder if that's how you think of it, or another way to say is what are the opportunities there, since I trust you, you're choosing this position to do this work from.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've changed my dissertation title a million times. And when I settled on this one, I was like, I hope people find it kind of funny and a little bit ironic that it's without the institution being produced within an institution. Cause I'm it's just definitely this struggle where I'm I've always wondered, can I do more active change within the confines of the institution, change it from the inside, or can I do more active change from the outside? But it's this back and forth. And this is kind of the line I've been straddling as, a community organizer, but also as an academic, where there's certain things I have to adhere to in order to do my dissertation, but then there's also things I have to adhere to myself as a community member and as a Black individual and as someone who's really trying to stay in touch and connected to my community. And something that I've, been in conversation with a lot of my friends in the activist community, and something that we always often forget is, I'm also a Black life. And I feel like I've spent like the past 3 or so years really engaging and actively organizing and trying to be like, how can I do all this activist work? How can we produce? And honestly, a lot of being more decolonial and a lot of unlearning these methods has really been listening to my body, listening to my community, and being like, okay, I'm not going to write a paragraph every week of my dissertation, as unfortunate as maybe it'll take me, 10 years, which I hope not, maybe I'll finish it tomorrow. But it's more like being this holistic of as things come and in the moment and listening to, what the community needs in this moment and how I can aptly speak to the ways that we've been engaging with one another. And I hope to do justice to the community in that regard, but also do justice to myself, because I really feel like I set out on this particular endeavor where I was like, in all honesty, I was like, I want to do a PhD to talk about my friends and my family and my loved one and my chosen family and this work that we have been doing, because it's been so ignored and pushed to the peripheries, but it's so significant. And it's like, this is my life, right? And it's like putting my life on paper. And that is what this PhD is. And it's like, I hope I can really do justice to talking about these intricacies and the necessity of doing that, because I'm still navigating how I can produce within the institution, but also talk about beyond the institution and all these kind of things. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but in, taking care of myself in this holistic approach, for instance, like there was times in like last year where my dissertation was on hold for 6 months just because I was in a bad headspace of what was going on in the Black community, what was going on with me as an individual and that kind of thing. So I hope that kind of answers the question of how I'm still navigating it, but it's also like, the scholars that I'm choosing to read a lot of their work and kind of uplift a lot of what I'm doing, when I'm so thankful that people like Syrus exist and have done this work and pioneer and like for us, because there's like things on disability, Black, queer justice have not been at the epicenter. And now it's like, now there's all this scholarship on it, and I'm like, and I can cite this and I can have this and have these things here because a lot of it was really ignored before. And it's like, now that we have this plethora of resources, I can like really cite these things and people will like hopefully see the value of this research being conducted.
Can I speak? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Okay. Hey, I don't know if you see me. I'm Rana's father, and I just want to say I'm very proud of her. I'm so proud. I never could have imagined her being so. So passionate. I'm out there watching this, and I'm just wanted to just let her know that, let the public know that, that we're, you've taken to another level. What we believe, what we're all about, caring about all lives, Black lives. But in fact, and I'm sitting back and I'm learning as old as I am and learning every day and interacting with her. So I just wanted to at least let her know this, let everybody know publicly. And I actually do, she's always bringing up Syrus. I actually want to say thank you for mentoring my daughter. I do appreciate that. This is the whole world and the community that she's in. I just want to, that was it.
Thank you. I love you.
Okay. Take care.
Great to see you again.
Okay. Gotta get back to work. And you're gonna teach me one day how to pronounce your last name. I'm still working on that.
Oh, yeah.
Take care.
So while people think about their comments and questions, I was wondering if you think that what do you think of the support that you have been given by the institution, since it's in your title? I was wondering, like, what do you think of the support that you have, and what the institution could do more to help you and support your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like being at Concordia has been really great because I have a lot of access to scholars of color, to AFAB folk, which is really great, who have been doing this work, which I'm very thankful of, and things like the Black Perspective Office, which exists, which my previous institution never really had access to, scholarships for Black students, social justice scholarships, and really uplifting and just really supporting the value of my research. I think one of the things is the institution, of course, institutions, they're on deadlines, they're on habitual schedules. So it's things like it's all often always about the output, which of course you have to output a dissertation. And I mean, I like to dream of a world someday where it's not about necessarily all the output, all the papers, all the conferences that I'm attending, but oftentimes like, you know, the engagement with the community. And I feel like I've produced a lot in the last couple of months, but at the institutional level, it might not be like, I haven't written much of my dissertation, for instance, or I haven't done a conference, but I taught an entire class on decolonizing art and architecture in Canada. And I was like, that was so significant for my research, for me to like engage with the community, engage with the students in the community, and just think about things in a different mindset. And to me, that was very helpful for my dissertation and the work that I'm doing. It actually helped ignite this fire and this passion, but it's like on a institutional level, you can't necessarily see the output. And so I guess I dream of a day where it's not about like all the words that I get down on paper or getting all the awards and all these things, but necessarily, but like, how have I engaged with the community actively and actually uplifted the values and the missions that my dissertation seeks to do? And I was like, in teaching the class, I've done that, you know, and like Black Lives Matter Sudbury, we had our Black Futures Week, which was inaugural, and it was great. And it was so big. And a lot of that is like, you know, dreaming about tomorrow, this Afrofuturist endeavor, these activists engaging, and this is really about what the dissertation is about. It's not just about, you know, for me producing this book in the end, it's about how have I engaged with my community and values as I go along the way. And I guess that's kind of my hope someday. And I think that's where I've been very thankful to still have this connection to Niswakmok, to Sudbury, to Black Lives Matter Sudbury, because I think a lot of that has really been keeping me going, pushing me forward, and even like incredibly thankful to have started with Wild Seed in the Black Arts Fellowship, because honestly, like we had one weekend of programming and I came out just being like, you know, it's a miracle that I exist, and it's a miracle that I'm writing this dissertation, because every other week I'm like, should I be doing this? Am I the right person to do this? And it's just like Wild Seed reminded me, like, sometimes we have to, it's not about production, but just like being in these spaces and like even having conversations like these to be able to engage in these conversations and hopefully inspire someone else to go out and fight for justice in their community. So, yeah.
Thanks. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk and your art and your work. It's beautiful. My name is Abby, and I'm studying in the business technology department here. I'm working with an incubator for Black entrepreneurs doing digital transformation. So if there is anything, I don't really see that much how digital would be that helpful here, except for like how we're all connecting now. But a term that I found really helpful that I was wondering if you've heard of it all is placemaking. So like I was looking at how, I mean, you even had in the video, they talked about take up space in this place and when you're building community. And so placemaking and thinking about what does it mean to have a place and build a place where they have the resources. So I was wondering if that could be something that would be interesting or helpful for you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, honestly, like my background in architecture is a lot of what has informed my artivism and has informed a lot of this. And it's funny because placemaking is something that they like talk to us in first year, and they're like placemaking and creating space for community. And I never really understood what the heck they were talking about. I was like, what does that even mean? Like, we're designing a building for a person, but what does it mean? And it's like, now where I'm at, I'm like, okay, how a lot of what I've been looking at is how can we create spaces that aren't colonial, which seems like, yeah, you just make a space where everyone wants to go in, but it's like, for me as a Black person, going into a museum is colonial, or going into like, I don't know, sometimes libraries is colonial just based on the architecture, the strategies, or even the engagements of the things, you know, hours, the security checks that you're going through, all these things. And just like placemaking is a lot informed, you know, for instance, like Culture Matrix, when we did it, we were like, it's about how can we create an accessible space? So we were like, no security on site for the event. We'll have community safety members and anyone can come through. And, you know, we just had free food out for people. And it was like, and a lot of people were like, well, aren't you afraid that displaced or houseless folks in the community are going to come through and take the food? And we're like, that's what we hope. You know, this is their home. We are taking up their space. We hope that they come through and engage with us. We hope that they come and say hello. We hope that they come take the food. And it's really about like repositioning what it means when we occupy space and repositioning what it means when we construct space. And, you know, a lot of these times when we do installations and we're creating these works together, it's like, we want it so that people can engage with it as yes, how we intended, but as they need to, you know, for instance, like Ethereal, when it was up, people were getting all kinds of things. And a lot of people were like, wow, you guys are just pretty and we just want to take pictures of it. And I was like, sure. But Black people were going and just staring and just like feeling something very deep rooted. And it was like, this is placemaking, you know, we're taking over this cafe, a space where a lot of white people go and hang out. But now we're like, but Black people are here. And what does this mean? And what does it mean to have all these Black faces surrounding you and just like existing in this space? So placemaking is something that I've like I keep thinking on of like, what does it mean when we create an installation in these spaces and it occupies all this? Yeah. Also, hi, Alice.
Hi, Alice. Yes, you can ask your question or your comment.
Okay.
Okay. I think she said she'll type them in the chat because of the echo.
I have a question. So I'm currently in Ottawa at the AFN, and I wanted to talk about or ask you about Black Indigenous solidarity. On Monday, Julie Black was awarded and honored for changing one word of the national anthem to recognize Indigenous sovereignty and to recognize whose land we're on. And I was curious to hear more about Black Indigenous solidarity, and how do you think about that within your own artistic practice and your academic practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. BLM Canada, I can't remember where on their webpage, but they say there's somewhere where it says, we're not free until we're all free. And I think that's something that I really, I've been holding close to me, because I think a lot of times in marginalized community, there's this frustration of not everyone in the community showing up for everyone in all the other communities because of time and commitments and just like energy and these kinds of things. And so for me, particularly with Indigenous communities, I'm like, there's so many parallels between our struggles, that I always say the same thing, but different. Like, obviously, I'm like, I cannot speak to what it's like to be an Indigenous person on these lands, but a lot of our struggles are rooted in the same, systems of hatred and oppression. And it's white supremacy that we're often, faced against one another. And a lot of times, in colonial spaces, it's like there's a space at the table for a Black or an Indigenous voice. When people are like, well, why can't we just add another seat at the table and create more space for all of us to have our voices heard? And so I think for me in my practice, I really while I am centering Black people, I really want to do justice to whose land I'm on, whose land I'm creating on. So, even when we did the ground mural, we were like, we're taking up semi-permanent space. We can't do this without Indigenous people being involved in these spaces. And every time I present, I'm like, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement of where my research is coming from, but also where am I situated today? And I think it's very important for us to contemplate what it means to be stolen bodies on stolen lands. And I'm like, if I can't uplift Indigenous people along the way, then I'm not doing my due diligence, helping us all fight for liberation together as we go through this journey. But it's also the methodologies that I'm using, I'm not trying to cite these colonial methods, and even the way we talk about museums and galleries and all these spaces. And if you notice, all the works that I've been working on and producing, none of them have been in galleries or they haven't been in institutional spaces. And I'm like, and I've been very strategic and intentional about that. Not to say that Myra's at this big level, but I'm like, what do museums and galleries mean for Indigenous people? When we talk about stolen artifacts and stolen arts and stolen things from the community. And so it's part of that is the ways in which I'm trying to keep engaging holistically, but also meaningfully in the community. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, and I can see Alice's question there, so I'll just click the chat.
Do you want me to read the question, Hannah? You don't want to read it before?
Yeah, if you'd like to read out loud, that'd be great.
Okay. So I have a question that Abby's made me think of, which is connected to placemaking and the city identity, and not unrelated brand identity of Sudbury. What have Black Lives Matter Sudbury interactions been like or aspire to be? And how might Black Lives Matter Sudbury be something that the city might operationalize for better or worse? Not to be too pessimistic or skeptical.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the first part. The interactions have been incredible and honestly very eye-opening, because I think when we first started, everyone wanted to people wanted to all be associated with Black Lives Matter and be with us in the streets and this and that, whatever. And then when we started to get more, I hate the word radical, but more radical in what we were talking for, I find a lot of people were like, oh, I support BLM, but not abolition, but not abolishing prison systems and not this, and like all these other connotations that we didn't realize. And I think it's like what BLM Sudbury has been so great at is like normalizing these conversations first and foremost. So, getting people comfortable with saying defund the police. And from there, getting comfortable with saying abolish these institutions and abolish prisons and abolish the police. And it's like, it's not an easy journey for sure, because like white supremacy exists and unconscious bias exists. And it's been a lot of like pushback. But I think like a lot of what we're doing is creating a space for people who didn't always have a space, voice these concerns or be in conversation or network with one another. And I think our caucus is great for that, because we're bringing all these different people from across the community, having them in conversation with one another, and just starting the ball rolling about what it means to exist in these communities as marginalized people, and having conversations on solidarity and engaging and just like dreaming of a better tomorrow, essentially this Afrofuturist, these futurities of what tomorrow can look like. And I think in terms of operationalizing, I think that's something that we've also I think any grassroots organization really struggles with, because we start grassroots, it's the people power, we're on the ground, we're doing this off grid. And then you start to realize that you really cannot make all the changes you want without somehow participating in some institution, and it's like really difficult to engage in it. Like, for instance, we want to do micro grants, or we want to engage with community members. We want to do all these festivals. And it's like, well, who's going to pay for it? Because as much as we love the community can't afford to pay for this. You have to apply for grants. You have to apply, even when we were doing the ground mural, we had to engage with the city, which is like the municipality, which directly supports the police services. And it's been like this back and forth. And we're like, if we want to defund the police, what does it mean to have conversations with political leaders? What does it mean to have conversations with the municipality, to sit down with the mayor and city councilors? And it's like this back and forth of being like, what kind of change do we want to instigate? How do we want to instigate this change? Because a lot of change does come from activist endeavors, but a lot of it is like the change doesn't happen until white people care, until the politicians decide they want to care. So it's this back and forth, and we're still navigating and working with it. But I'm very proud of what we've achieved today, because a lot of it honestly has been destigmatizing these conversations, which has been really great, but also creating safer spaces for the community. Like Culture Matrix, we did it, and after the event, a lot of people came up to us and said, I haven't been in a festival related space where I felt this protected, this safe, this welcomed in the environment. We had drag kings, we had Indigenous performers, we had Black performers, we had performers of color, and we were like, we just want to make a space where anyone can come in and engage in these spaces, and you don't feel like it's this big bad thing that you can't participate and actively engage with. So I hope that answers your question.
Go ahead. I have thank you for your presentation. I was really interested just to get your background as an architecture, because I'm currently doing a master's in architecture, but I also don't really want to be like a practicing architect. So it's something I'm quite interested in knowing more about your journey, maybe away from a more traditional practicing architect towards pursuing a PhD, if you can elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, it's actually funny. And my parents are on this call, but it's funny because in second year university, I was like, I will never be an architect. And I decided this after maybe I was halfway through my second year. I was like, I'm never going to be an architect, because the field just felt very counter to what I needed in life. But I decided to keep going through the motions, because I was like, I know there's something else on the other side of this. And it wasn't until I did my master's that I was like, wow, well, first of all, I was like, there's so many other things you can do with background in architecture. And my master's is actually what liberated me, I find, in realizing that the practice, there's being a licensed architect and being in the field, but there's so much to do beyond being a licensed architect. There's teaching, there's engaging, and architecture really opened the door to lead me to art history, because I was looking at segregation in the South Side of Chicago. And in doing that, I came across the Black Panther Party in Chicago, Illinois, and I came across Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton, honestly, I'm like, Fred Hampton radicalized me. I read a lot of the things that he was saying. I was watching speeches, and I just became so enamored with his work. And I was like, wow, why has nobody ever told me about this person? Why have I never seen anything of Fred Hampton? And it was just because he was this radical being that was conspired to be killed by the CIA. And it was just from there, I found the works of Emory Douglas, who is the Minister of Culture of the Black Panther Party. And he was just he is this incredible arts activist, and a lot of what he did was so revolutionary. And I really just started to see the connections between activism and art and what it meant to like liberate yourself and radicalize yourself through your practice and your field and like what you do. And so I was like, I'm going to lean into that and like see where it takes me. And then, you know, a lot of my support system here in Sudbury, people were like, yeah, you could write a PhD on this and like put it together. And I never thought I was ready. And I was like, people told me I had to do like 10 years in the architecture field before I could like pursue a PhD. And I was like, no, well, I don't know. And then it was funny because one of my mentors at the time, Thomas Strickland, I said to him, I was like, Thomas, I don't know if I'm ready to do this. And I was like, what if I'm not ready? And he was like, well, if you're not ready, they won't accept you. And if you're ready, it means they'll accept you. And I got into Concordia my first time applying, and I was like, I guess it's time. This story needs to be told. The time is now. And so I embarked on my journey, started doing my dissertation, and it's really cool to see how much art has come out of it and how radical and just like fun it's been, in all honesty. And, you know, there's that like kind of cheesy quote where it's like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm like, I'm always working, but I don't work, is how I like to see it. And it's just like, this dissertation is fun and it's research and it's so important. And this art is fun and it's just engaging. And it's like, it's so liberating to be able to do all this and make it my life's work, essentially. So I implore you to do that. And I hope you can find something that makes you feel as impassioned as I am about this Black art and activism.
We have another question from Alice Jin's class. It's from Jane. So do you feel your research is never ending because activism keeps growing and expanding, which is great, but how do you decide how your dissertation will end with the perfect examples? Yes.
That is such a good question, honestly. And it's funny because I've been talking to a lot of people that have done their PhDs, and they're like, you know, one day you wake up and your advisor is going to be like, you're done, like this is it, or you're going to be like, you're like, this is it, because this is the thing. And it's funny because even as I did this presentation, I was like, there's so many other projects on the horizon that are happening, and I'm still like gathering all this information. And I know that one day I'm just going to have to be like, we stop here and this is the it. And I'm like, I don't know if it will coincide with my time ending with Black Lives Matter Sudbury, or if it will coincide with something, but I very much feel like it's not going to be this perfect ending, and I don't want it to necessarily be. You know, I want this dissertation to hopefully be like a part one of many, as it were. You know, this is just kind of the beginning of a greater thing, and just like kind of opening the door to the next generations of artists and activists and artivists and change makers in the community. And I think that the ending may not be like this nice, neat little bow like some dissertations are, where they're like, well, we did the research and here's all the numbers and this is kind of like our conclusion. I'm like, there will be a conclusion, of course, of like my takeaways and this and whatever, but I think it'll be very much like there's always going to be projects on the go and always the next stage. And as sad and like hard as it is for me to say this, and this is something that I always, you know, sit with my Black Lives Matter family with, is Black people are going to keep dying, and, you know, the institution's going to keep fighting us. And it's not something where I'll finish this dissertation and be like, that's racism solved, you know. It's like there's still going to be the change that has to be done. And I am excited for like hopefully postdoctoral opportunities and like the other things that can kind of come out of this, because it's not going to be this kind of thing. It's going to be messy, it's going to be weird, but I'm like, I hope in that it'll be engaging and really encourage people to learn more and keep engaging with these communities. So thank you for your question.
And that's a really amazing perspective. I have a lot of things to learn from you. PhDs can be so hard. Are there any more questions or comments? Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, as an as an activist and as well as an architecture. So what can you say about racial discrimination in housing?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So as an architect and as an activist, so what can you say about racial discrimination in housing, especially towards like Black people? There's been the issue of like racism in housing.
Yeah, I mean, my preliminary research when I was doing my dissertation, it stemmed out of housing, right? It stemmed out of, redlining, which for folks who are not familiar about redlining, essentially what happened is, governments and municipal political bodies, they basically took these maps, outlined different communities in different colors, and the ones that were outlined in red were considered like at risk, undesirable, and they basically were like, this is where we will allow certain populations to live. And then to correspond with that, banks would give abysmal loans to people of color, to displaced people, to people who are like impoverished or coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then that's how you create these redlining zones. That's how you kind of that's how they segregated a lot of the communities, that and like gerrymandering, which is through like political processes as well. And I think like today it still exists. When we look at our house list and displaced populations, a lot of the people who are living in these situations are not predisposition. They're predominantly Black, they're predominantly brown, they're predominantly indigenous, and I mean that's not like what's the word I'm looking for? That's not like a coincidence is what I mean to say. It's a systemic issue in terms of how we look at it. And the government is very, not to go on a whole political rant about the government and all the things that I think they're doing inherently wrong or whatever, but I'm like, a lot of these are strategic things that they have done. Even when we look at the prison industrial complex, for instance. And I remember I was talking to someone and we were talking about displaced folks, and they were saying that a lot of displaced folks will intentionally get caught for committing crimes because at least they have a roof over their head when they're living in the prison systems, which the prison systems are absolutely terrible and they're completely dehumanizing, but it was because the systems that be are refusing to put money into housing strategies. And I think that, when we see how a lot of systems have reacted to, for instance, like if we look at like the tragedy that was happening in Ukraine, for instance, when you have all these white people looking for status and looking for to immigrate for protection or refugee status, a lot of governments jumped on and they wanted to protect these people, they wanted to take care of them, they wanted to house them, versus this has happened to so many Black and brown communities throughout time and space, and nobody has jumped on it the same. And it's just like the ways in which we're looking at the racism that still exists. Even in Ukraine, there was Black people who were living there and they were told they couldn't leave the country. They were told they had to wait until white people were able to get to safety and that kind of thing. So I think it's like this very systemic thing still that exists in housing. And even now for Black people trying to get loans or access to space. And I mean, this leads into the whole conversation on space, which I think the Wild Seed Center in Toronto is a really interesting case study for that, because, BLM Canada buys this house and a lot of people were like, why did you quote unquote waste money on buying this house on this space? And, it opened this conversation of the need to have space, a safe space where you can organize and engage with your community members. And I think that's something that Black Lives Matter Sudbury, we've gone back and forth of, do we want a permanent space or do we like engaging with one another in other people's space? Because there's something so significant in being able to have this space, especially like a home or a house where you can kind of like have the free reign, and it's like theoretically the space where you feel the most safest to engage in all these activities. So I don't exactly have an answer for this, but I think it's like a much larger conversation that needs to be had there.
No, it's okay, because I know it's not how it's a much larger conversation, like I said. Yeah.
Of course.
Is that good? I'm trying to like figure out exactly how to phrase it. Hi, my name's Bart. I think of this always from the sort of political, component. And I think it's really cool that you're not blatantly dealing with the politics sort of first. And coming at it from a very different angle. And the way I'm thinking about it is like politics, or if you take the political angle, it's a little bit more of like this is why we shouldn't hate people or shouldn't dislike people, versus this angle is a little bit more like this is why everyone should be appreciated and celebrated, which is sort of like the opposite of like, instead of like don't hate, it's like why don't we accept, right? And I guess my sort of question is like, how do you then, because eventually this has to be political if anyone wants any change to happen, as we mentioned, before. But how do you sort of like, avoid the politics as much as you can to sort of not off-put stupid white people who, are just going to be turned off by even having the political conversation, but eventually sort of getting to that, because if people don't vote differently or vote in general, nothing is going to happen, even if we decide that we like the people, right? So how do you sort of wrap those two things together in a way that's palatable for people and effective, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know if I have a clear answer for this one, because it's something that I'm still navigating, and it's funny because I've had a lot of conversations with my parents about this idea of like, what does it mean to be like not too radical so that people can still digest what you're saying? Because I know a lot of the times I'm like out of the gate running and I'm mad and I'm just like shouting all these political things, and I'm just like, how do we make it in a way where like the palatableness of it is definitely important? Because I'm like, I find a lot of my research is not palatable, but I think through the veil of art, it becomes more palatable. But I also feel like, I think when I first started like engaging in this research, I was very concerned about like, are people going to want to read this? Are conferences going to want to put this up? Are they going to want to, are they going to want to engage with this? And then as I've been going through the process, a lot of it, and I think like being a student at Concordia and being accepted into this space has really like liberated me, being like, not everyone's going to want to engage with this research because it's hard and it's heavy, and a lot of it is like inward looking at like how we contribute to these systems and how we are complicit in white supremacist systems and that kind of thing. And so I'm still trying to navigate it, because I'm like, of course I want people to read it, and of course I want people to engage with it and understand the importance of it, but I'm like, I don't know necessarily if that's my role to play in this kind of political structure or whatever. And I'm like, maybe the role I'm here to play is just to liberate my community and encourage other individuals from Black and Brown communities to, whether to do research or to do the art or to have their voices heard. Because I think a lot of this stems from this erasure that I really felt while I was in architecture school, and the silencing of like, I couldn't have a voice and people were always speaking on behalf of me and always wanted this. And I feel like my dissertation has been this is my voice, and you might not like it, but this is what I have to say. And here is where it's coming from. And here's other people's voices. And it's really about just like getting these voices heard and like pushing beyond the erasure and getting out there. And hopefully it gets to the ears that need to hear it. And I think that at the end of this dissertation, sure, I would love it if an institution woke up and was like, this is what we have to change in order to make art more accessible, or in order to make academia accessible. And that would be great. But I'm like, I don't think that's my goal necessarily, for me. And I keep reminding myself, a lot of my goal is that like, I have a sister who's 7 years younger than me. And I'm like, I want to finish this dissertation and hand it to her. And she reads it and she's like, I can do anything. The world is my oyster. And she's going to go out there and change the world, that I can someday give this to my children in the future, and they'll read this and they'll be like, the sky's the limit. I can go create this art, and they might not like it, but it's beautiful and it needs to be heard. Because I really was thinking like, a lot of this, I was like, people didn't like what Fred Hampton had to say. And so they silenced him. They didn't want to hear what he had to say. And I have always been enamored by him and like Angela Davis and the words they were saying, and how people were just like, we don't want to hear that, but it was so important how liberating it was for the Black community. And I'm like, I hope in some regard I can do something like that I can just like liberate people to use their voice, because it's really one of the most powerful tools that we have. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I know I don't.
Yeah, I sort of just a comment of like, I really like the angle you're taking, and it's just sort of propping people up, instead of getting into the sort of argumentative, and this is a very effective way to present the question.
Well, and can I join on that point? I made conversation. So, as a social movement scholar, so that's where I'm speaking from. I don't. There's many examples of where social movements don't really serve that purpose, right? Or key strategies that have won, be it in the Black community, Indigenous community, feminist movements, etc., are sort of these breaking points, or people would call them ruptures in whatever cultural expectations we have. So some would argue that politics kind of follows social movement, and we're all coming at this from a different angle. But this conversation about palatable, which is often posed to by Black scholars, I would say, is more, as a white social movement scholar, I try to be careful of, again, who is listening and how are we listening? Because it may not be about making it palatable to my ears, but rather like, what is the gift as Rana is speaking to for her community and her generations to follow, at least to pick up where you left off, that may in fact, this future isn't like, I may not actually be able to see the impact that it's going to have in the next generation, but I may have the chance to be a part of it. So that's how I think of politics. And maybe my hopefulness for social movements is that sometimes we need I mean, radical is kind of like a toss term, but radical in the sense that it breaks the way we think about what is expected and what is normalized now in order to actually imagine what might be normal to come. So I think, you know, to be compassionate, I think we share the same hopefulness, but the means to the end are very different with good reason.
Well, maybe that's the answer why the political argument doesn't work when it's right out the gate. Maybe this has to come first, and then you know that's the sort of credibility that you have to build the political movement behind it. You know, actually make change lasting.
Yeah, and an argument. I mean, I think it's interesting. We're at the social justice center, so it's part of all these entry points to how this social change happen. But similarly, in political spaces, we could say, okay, well, who are politics accountable to, and how, and careerism, and so on. So there's been fruitful and tense relationships between social movements and established politics for a while, but there's a lot to learn from these liberatory politics, I would say.
Yeah, and I think like a couple weeks ago, I was in conversation with Elle Jones, like incredible scholar, poet, just like spoken word artist, just incredible. And one of the things she had said to me was like, you know, I asked her about like her dream basically for an Afrofuturist future or whatever. And she said a lot of times we spend so much time dreaming about tomorrow that we don't think about what we can do today, essentially. And I think that in my research now, I'm trying to really like reground and like, you know, I'm not going to wake up and abolish the police tomorrow as much as I would love to. I'm not going to wake up and change all these institutions tomorrow as much as I'd love to. But what can I do within my lifetime? What can I do within the confines of this, however many years of this degree? You know, what can I do with my time here on this planet? And so I'm trying to like, I don't know, just reposition in that and also find comfort in that and also find joy in that, because I think a lot of this research is like, I think a lot of this research is really heavy, and I think that's why sometimes I really do have to disconnect from it, because it's heavy and it's real and it's, you know, our lives. But I think it's important to, for me, a lot of it's been like just rooting in the joy and being like, well, I might not change anything, but I found the joy in this and I gave people a platform to speak, and that's all I can really achieve in this moment. So yeah, and yeah, in terms of the palatable conversation, that's something that I always go back and forth with, because I think I spent so much of my life trying to be palatable to whoever in my life, like people in positions of power, to parents, to schools, to, I don't know, white people and things like that. And I think now I'm at this point where I'm like, I love making people uncomfortable in this. And I'm like, I hope people are kind of uncomfortable with my research, and I hope it, you know, if it makes people mad, great. I'm like, because it further speaks to the need for this kind of research and that kind of thing. So.
I have another question. In fact, I have two. I will start with, I would like to know more about the movement of Afrofuturism. And do you have any, like, maybe just can explain to me where it's coming from, and maybe some type of work that I could read to learn more about Afrofuturism and sci-fi from a BIPOC perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so for Afrofuturism, I'm still like I call myself a baby Afrofuturist. I still have so much to learn and so much more reading, but a lot of it comes from speculative fiction, you know, people like Octavia Butler. There's honestly this really good book called Black Futures, which I've been listening to on an audiobook, and they just kind of talk about, they have different chapters that talk about different Black bodies in the future. And it's been really interesting for me to read and to learn about that. I think I'm not super familiar with all of where it stems from. I've just been kind of looking at like a lot of contemporary Afrofuturists and a lot of like the work that they're doing, but I'm trying to root more in that. The more my dissertation is kind of, because admittedly my dissertation has pivoted towards Afrofuturism. Originally I was centering more queer identities, and then I kind of pivoted away from that. And I wanted to lean more into Afrofuturism, but I definitely say like Octavia Butler and a lot of that. And honestly, like a lot of the things that like people like Jordan Peele are doing is like very like, just like reimagine this weird speculative Black fiction, which has been really cool. Yeah, and so like Black Futures, the book, Octavia Butler, I'd highly recommend. And just like, it's just really about like reimagining these bodies in a different way. And even like people like Janelle Monáe has been really instrumental in that through her music, and like her, a lot of her albums really speak to this like Afrofuturity. And honestly, like Black Panther, as much as like I'm a Marvel superhero stan, but like Black Panther really, I think that was really an important time in like mainstream media for Afrofuturism, because a lot of people were like, oh, what does it mean to have like Black people have access to all this technology and to be leaders in so many different things and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of my little rant on Afrofuturism. And I just know I have so much more to learn from the people before me who've been like talking about this, because it's so incredible and endless.
No, I find it fantastic. I just bought myself the book Afrofuturism by Silko and Afko. They are two Black sisters working on ecology and animal rights from an Afrofuturist perspective. And this is like the only work I'm familiar with in Afrofuturism for now, but I will check out the recommendation. Are there any more questions? Can I ask another one then? Just okay, my last one. I was wondering, from which type of group did you have some or feel some kind of pushback when you are doing your artivism and all these happenings are like outside in public spaces? Did you feel any? Did you encounter any pushback from, of course, white people? I'm saying, but specifically like particular groups of like white supremacists, or you haven't had to deal with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, particularly for the ground mural, which I have there, that one particularly, like white supremacists absolutely hated it. Just the mere fact that we had painted like we exist in this community, essentially, they instantly were like threatening to paint over it, and they were just like really unhappy that we were like, we're here and we exist. I find usually art is more people are open to accepting art when they do it. It's because the thing is, because art is so often open to interpretation, sometimes people aren't even reading the messages that we are like covertly coding in them for members of the Black community. You know, we did Ethereum, people were like, wow, it's really gorgeous and we love it. We're like, Ethereum was a whole political statement about hair and this, and it stemmed from this like people touching our hair in public, people always commenting on our hair and having something to say about our hair. And Ethereum was like very political, but a lot of people didn't read the political undertones of it. So I find usually people are very good at being like, yeah, and like accepting the art. It's more like when we do like the traditional art, I'll say, because I do think activism is an arts form, and I think it's important to recognize that. And when we do more like rallies and stuff, people a lot of times are very like uncomfortable with us just like showing up in spaces and taking up these spaces and just existing in these spaces, and the mere existence of like, for instance, a couple years ago when we first started forming, we had a Juneteenth rally. We all gathered in the park, and I've never seen that many Black faces together in Sudbury. And the sheer discomfort of like white supremacists who showed up and were just like watching from the sidelines because they didn't like this idea of us, quote unquote, congregating together and just like being in community, being in space with one another. And I think that's been a lot of the pushback that I've kind of got there. But usually people are very good about this kind of thing. It's just like, I find it's the more written forms, or when we say more deliberately to the point of like, when I say defund the police, the amount of pushback that I got there, or when I talked about like the need for Black Lives Matter, or the need for these kinds of things, the pushback you get and the discomfort that people get because you're directly speaking to these messages. And you know, projects like Into the Matrix, I'm like, Into the Matrix, if you read into it enough, it's like, it's about abolishing the police. It's about abolishing these systems. It's about a change in the thing, because it's dreaming of this liberated Black tomorrow. And for Black people, that's what a liberated future looks like, you know? That's what it feels like to be unequivocally free. And people just like don't necessarily read the undertones of that, or even like, you know, we had this video that went with it and it said there's Black people in the future, and a lot of people were like, yeah, this is really cute and we love it. It's like, you're not seeing how powerful and important this message is and all the nuances that go within it. So, I mean, I hope people get out of the art, but also it's like, it's nice to have these coded messages in there for Black and brown people to kind of see the representation of things that need to be happening. But I mean, the pushback's always there. The amount of times like before, when I wanted to do art and I just like, people didn't want to give me space to create art or space to talk about art. And now it's like, it's interesting because I worked so hard to be like threading this line of being the back and forth of, okay, I won't be too political and whatever. And the lack of respect I was getting in the field per se. And then the moment when I started to do Black Lives Matter and I started to do more public activist intentions and be more like forward about my message, then the amount of times that the same people who didn't want to hear what I had to say were like, wow, come speak to my class, come be in this space, share in this community and tell me everything that you know. And it's like, so it's very interesting in that regard, but yeah.
Great. So I don't see any question from people online. Let me just check. No, so. Is it okay? Yeah, okay, so I think it's time to congratulate you. And to say best of luck for your work. It would have been cool to see you in person, but I know how complicated it was. Thank you so much, Syrus Ware, to Marcus. I say Marcus, eh?
Syrus Marcus Ware, it's great. You can either name is great.
For joining us and everyone on Zoom. So I recorded the session and in a couple of days I will be able to put it on the YouTube of the Social Justice Center if you all agree with it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Congratulations.
Thanks everyone online.
Yeah.